Welcome back to part 3 of our series where we are building a trading robot using Python and more specifically the TD Ameritrade API. So this is the third time I'm recording this video. First 2 times didn't go so great, so I said, well, you know what? Third time's the charm. All right, so previous video, what did we talk about? Well, for the most part, we were just getting some stuff set up. I would say kind of just laying out the template of our project. So we were kind of discussing a little bit about the objects we were going to be working with and getting those files kind of just prepped in the sense of like, in essence, just creating them, nothing fancy. But after that, we then moved into the robot.py file. And just to give you a little bit of a refresher, really the purpose of this file is, I would say, the kind of the entry point into this whole, I would say this whole project as a whole, because the idea behind it is that this robot object is going to really represent you, and you do certain things like specifying trades, using indicators, building portfolios, and so much more. And this robot object is really going to be the entry point into the other objects. And so ideally, what we will see is that the methods we've defined in our robot object will return other objects that we are now going to define in the upcoming videos. Now, with that being said, we also saw that, excuse me, the robot object also has properties that can help us answer some very common questions we might have when we're trading. So things like, hey, when is the regular market open, and so on and so on. And we also saw that, there's some challenges with that too. You got to know if it's a weekday, a weekend, and you also have to make sure that, are we talking about a holiday potentially? So there's a lot of challenges that come with that, unfortunately, but it's not impossible. It just means you have to kind of go about it in a detailed approach. Obviously right now that's kind of lacking in certain regards, but over time that will be added. All right, so now that we have our robot object kind of defined, we're going to move on to our next object, which is the portfolio object. And so the portfolio object is ideally going to mimic a portfolio, and a portfolio is made up of positions, and a position represents ideally some type of financial instruments that it itself has information about. So things like it's maybe a ticker symbol, an asset type, a purchase price, a purchase date. All of this information can be very valuable when we are trading because it can help us determine when to execute certain strategies, and in a lot of cases when to enter or exit certain positions, because we might want to ask very basic questions. Is this position profitable? Do we even own this position? Very trivial questions, but we need to have some type of easy mechanism for being able to ask those questions as we're running our robot. So first things first, let's import a few little modules. Now, for the most part, we actually have a lot that we can use from our previous video. And so we're going to be using the typing module, and we're going to be importing the list type, the dictionary type, the union type, and then we're also going to import another type called optional. And this will make a little bit more sense when you kind of see it in action. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a new class object. This one will be called portfolio. And then from here, this portfolio object will also have an init method. And this init method will have one argument. It's going to be called account number, and it actually is an optional argument. And so what we can do is we can do the optional type, and with the optional type, we can specify that it's an optional string. So if they choose to pass it through, we do want it to be a string. Now, some people might ask, why use this? What's really the advantage? Well, personally for me, and again, this is just my opinion, I find this a little bit more explicit. It's very clear. It's optional. It's not required. And so there's that component. Additionally, usually it's a little bit more, well, it's basically the equivalent of doing this, right? So normally if we specify an optional argument, it would be something like string equals none. And so what we can do is we can basically condense that into something that's a little bit more explicit and says, hey, that argument is optional, but if you do pass it through, it should be a string. Now, this isn't going to raise an exception, and that's very important to understand. This will not raise an exception saying, hey, you passed through a number. Like, my goodness, what's wrong with you? It just kind of gives that type hinting component that can be used in IDEs and stuff like that. So it's advantageous, but keep in mind there's still a couple checks that you might have to do in certain parts. Okay, then from here, what we're going to do is we're going to start defining some attributes about our particular class. And so one of them is going to be something called positions, and this is actually going to be a dictionary, and this is going to obviously house all of our positions. Another one that we might want to know is the positions count. A little bit trivial, but we'll just leave it for right now. I mean, technically, there's a lot of different ways you could do this that maybe doesn't require a whole attribute aspect, but for right now, we'll just leave it. And then we might want to know the market value of our particular portfolio. We might want to know the profit or loss. So we might want to know, hey, how much money have we made or lost with our particular portfolio? So we'll define a profit loss attribute. In some cases, we might want to know certain things like risk tolerance. And right now it's kind of arbitrary. I'm not really specifying what risk tolerance is at this point, but a lot of people do use that when it comes to making trading decisions. So this is actually functionality I have not added, but I am planning to add, which is helping you calculate risk tolerance for a particular portfolio. Right now, again, it's arbitrary. I haven't really defined what it is, but ideally there will be certain methodologies we can follow when it comes to calculating that metric. And then finally, we'll have an account number. This is really going to be more useful with certain things when it comes to maybe making API calls and stuff like that. And then additionally, there's also some situations where you might actually have multiple accounts. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to define our first method. This one is going to be called add position. So this will add a new position to our particular portfolio. And so I'll put in my self keyword, and I'm going to move my notes because technically I put that one after. Yes. Oh, that's what I do. I mess up my notes and then I do this. Oh, there it is. Perfect. Okay. So with the add position method, there's going to be a couple arguments that we're going to be passing through. The first one will be the symbol itself. So this is a unique identifier for a particular position, ideally. And then we're going to have another one, which is the asset type. So at some point, we'll be adding functionality that will give you some type of overview of how your positions are allocated across different asset types. So having that information is valuable because it will be necessary when it comes to calculating those metrics. Additionally, we will also have another argument called quantity, and that will default to 0, and it will be an integer. And so in this situation, what we are saying is how many of this particular quantity of this particular instrument do you want to add to your portfolio, ideally. And then additionally, we will have a purchase price. So as we are trading, ideally, we will be picking up certain positions at different prices. And so we will be defining a purchase price, which we can then use in other functionality that we will be adding to our portfolio. So asking questions like whether it's profitable or not. And then finally, we're going to have another argument. This one, we will also use that optional type. And then this one for right now will be a string. And then you notice here how it's highlighted red. That's because with these ones, if we don't provide a default value, it needs to be before the ones that we do provide a default value. So when you do that, ideally that little red line should go away and never show up again. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually just move this over a little bit. And then finally, with this one, add positions, this will also return a dictionary as well. All right, so what is going to be adding a position looking like? Well, for the most part, it's not too bad. It's actually relatively straightforward once you kind of look at it a little bit. All we're going to do is we're going to call that positions dictionary. We're going to add a key to it, and that key is going to be the symbol. And then we're going to have a dictionary that is associated with that key. So we're basically creating a nested dictionary. And then I'm going to copy this little guy right here because we're going to be repeating it quite a few times to add the different information. And so the first piece of information is literally very repetitive, but we will be adding the symbol. A lot of people might ask, why add the symbol again? Is that really necessary? Probably not, but there are certain situations where I have found it's advantageous to not have it necessarily as the key. In certain cases, maybe having it as a data frame or something like that. It's just adding that extra level of flexibility. It's not that hard to incorporate. So for the most part, I kind of just put it in there. Additionally, we will have that quantity key. That will be the quantity that we pass through. And then we'll have that purchase price. That will be the purchase price that we pass through. And then we're going to have that purchase date. So that purchase date, so the date we purchase the asset, and that will be that purchase date argument that we pass through. And then finally, we will have that asset type. And so for right now, these are just the basic things that we will be adding to our portfolio. In the future, there is more than likely going to be more added to this, but for right now, we will keep it relatively simple. And then finally, what we will do is we will return the positions dictionary back to the user. And so this way, that way they can see everything that was sent back to them, ideally. That's kind of the goal behind it. So that's really the whole purpose of this one, is making it where it's a little bit easier for the user to get a kind of high level picture of what they've added so far. Now, this is assuming they want to add one position at a time. A lot of times you will find they will want to add multiple positions. So all I'm going to do is I'm going to do the same method again, but I'm going to say add positions. And with this one, it's going to be a little bit different. I'm not going to assume that they're going to give me these keyword arguments. I will, however, be expecting that they pass through a list of dictionaries. And so in this case, I'm going to say self, and then I'm going to say positions, and then this one will be a list of dictionaries. And again, this will also return a dictionary itself. That's the goal behind it. And then with this one, very important to understand, this is not going to return an error necessarily if you're passing through something. So what we will do is we're going to say if is instance, the positions argument that we pass through. If that is a list, then go for it and continue. Otherwise, what we're going to do is we're going to say, hey, we want you to raise a type error. And that type error is going to be positions must be a list of dictionaries. Now, I know some of you might ask, Alex, how am I going to remember all this? Don't worry. I put little usage things here. So this is kind of the nice thing about this whole process, is I've tried to make your life a little bit easier. So now you'll have these little usage examples right here for you, and then hopefully make your life a little bit easier as well. That's the goal, at least. All right. So then from here, what are we going to do when we are starting to add these particular positions to our positions attribute, right? So we're going to say for position in positions. And then from here, what we can actually do is we can just call that add positions method again. And then we'll make it pretty simple on ourselves. We'll just say that's the position dot symbol. Actually, no, I think with this one, yeah, no, that one's fine. That one's fine. And then the next one will be the asset type. Again, they should be passing that through. And then asset type. And then next will be the purchase date. And that will be the position purchase date. And then from here, I'm actually going to change this a little bit just to make myself a little bit more comfortable. What I'll say is, hey, I'm going to use that get method where I can specify a default value, and that default value will just actually be none. We'll keep it for none for right now. And so in that case, if they don't pass it through, it's not going to raise an error, but at the same time, it will also make sure that it, what is the word? It will set it to none, ideally. Now, maybe it makes a little bit more sense to kind of be a little bit more explicit here and actually specify to the user and say, hey, that's really a value error, but that will probably be added at some point, maybe down the road. But for right now, we're just gonna kind of keep it just like that, just to make my life a little bit easier. And then finally, I think that's actually it. Is that everything? Purchase date, symbol, quantity. Quantity equals position dot get, and then it's going to be that quantity. And then if they don't pass anything through, guess what? It's going to be 0. Bam. And then what's happening here? Position, symbol, asset type, purchase price. Did I miss something? Quantity option? No, I think that's fine. Oh, it's because this one's a duplicate. That's why. I was like, why is it highlighted saying it's wrong? It's not wrong, I didn't think. And then finally, what we're going to do is we're going to return self.positions as well. So this is an easy way where the user can add multiple positions at once. However, they do need to pass it through as a dictionary to make our lives a little bit easier. All right, next one, we're going to talk about removing a position. So we're going to define another method. We're going to call that one remove position. This one, we're going to make our lives a little bit easier. And with this, we're going to say, hey, you just need to pass through an argument called symbol. It should be a string. And then I'm going to be sending back to you a tuple with a boolean and then a string. That string will be a message. And so very simple question we're going to ask. We're going to say, if that symbol is in self.positions, great. It means it exists. So I want you to first delete self.positions and then the symbol. So delete the position from our portfolio. And then I want to return back to the user a tuple where the first argument is true, meaning it was successfully deleted. And then the next one will be the symbol, bam, was successfully removed. And then actually what I'm going to do here is make my like that. And then we're going to do format symbol equals symbol. And then next, if it didn't exist, well, that's fine. Some cases it might not exist. I don't want to necessarily raise an error at this point, but I will return that, hey, did not exist in the portfolio. So something like that. Make, again, hopefully a little bit simple, nothing too crazy. We're going to put a couple placeholders, but I'm not going to actually be filling them out right now. So the first one's going to be total allocation. This would be showing your distribution across asset classes. Next one would be risk exposure. Again, very arbitrary at this point, but some type of risk metric. The next one will be a kind of like a method, and we'll call this one in portfolio. Self, you're going to be giving me a symbol. It's going to be a string, and then I'm going to be returning back a boolean to you. So here, if symbol in self.positions, return true, else return false. Okay, so that one hopefully makes a little bit sense. All you're going to do is just, again, very easy way asking questions. It sounds like a very trivial question. Trust me, it's nice to have this information easily accessible and easily callable when you're trading, because a lot of times it does actually impact your trading decisions sometimes. Another very popular question I find myself asking all the time is something profitable? Oh, I cannot tell you how many times I've asked myself that, right? Well, this one's a little bit more complicated, but all we're really doing is we're passing through an extra argument. And then what we're going to be doing is just simply asking, hey, is that purchase, is the current price profitable? So the first thing we need to do is grab the purchase price. And so we'll say purchase price equals self.positions. We're going to grab the symbol that was passed through, and then everybody should have a purchase price. So we have that, and then we're going to say if symbol in self.positions. That's stupid. That actually doesn't make a lot of sense. I don't know why I have that there. If it's not in there, it's going to fail here. I don't know why I'm asking that. So what we really want is the purchase price less than or equal than the current price? If it is, return true. And then else, return false. So all we're going to say is if the current price is higher than the purchase price, then return true. And then the other one that I guess you could kind of do as well is if you want to be very, I guess, clear, you could say, hey, if the purchase price is greater than the current price. There are sometimes, I guess, you could have situations where if you have a negative price, I'm trying to understand how that situation would go, because that would also have to assume it would always come back profitable. I guess maybe there's some extra checks I could do here where, maybe I guess they could pass through a -1. But that's going to be a little bit weird because now I'm trying to think of a situation where you would have a negative price. I mean, the only time you would have it is like you probably grabbed the wrong the wrong field from one of the API responses, and that one just so happened to be negative. But even then, it still should return false. So that should still kind of, it's going to give you the wrong answer, but it's going to give you the wrong one. It's going to give you the right one based on the wrong information. So yeah, I think I'd probably leave it like this. I don't think it really makes sense. And like I said, technically we don't even need this part. We could just say false, but I think this is just, again, a little bit more clear, and it hopefully kind of just helps the reader kind of understand, like, oh, okay, like all he's really doing is just asking a very simple question. And then we're going to define one final one up here, total market value, and then we'll do self. Something like that. So we'll actually take these ones and just put them down below, just to kind of keep our little placeholders down here. So again, at some point we will be adding this, but this is just kind of enough to kind of get us started and stuff like that. How long have we been going? Ooh, long enough. All right, so that does it for this particular video. So again, just to recap, all we did is we covered the portfolio object. This is going to be very important when we're going to be trading, getting in and out of positions, in some cases multiple times a day. So we need some type of framework where we can keep all that information organized and then ask very general questions about our portfolio. So whether we own a position or not, whether a particular position is profitable or not, and then also just getting a better understanding of the bigger picture. So things like, the risk exposure, maybe a summarized version of our portfolio or total market value, things along that nature where it could definitely be advantageous when we're trying to make real-time decisions quickly. Having that functionality built out for us beforehand definitely has a nice way of making our lives easier as we're trying to trade. Because ideally, we don't want to have to make our lives more complicated by defining that logic in the actual running script. Ideally, that logic has been well defined beforehand, and then we're just kind of calling it from our main script. That's kind of the reason I did it like this, was I wanted that logic built beforehand, not defined as the robot's running, because ideally that can create some inconsistencies. Trust me, I've known. I've done it myself. But yeah, I think at this point, if you have any questions, by all means, put them down in the comments below, and I'll do my best to get back to you. I will be making another push tonight to the repo. I did make a few changes. So for those of you who kind of have here, I did start, just doing certain things to the stock frame. So this one is just kind of asking certain things. I'm starting to build in the logic for checking conditions. And then additionally, I refined the indicators a little bit just to make it a little bit more simplified and more consistent. But that seemed to all be working nicely and stuff like that. So it's definitely coming along very well, but we're definitely getting there. So that's always encouraging. But yeah, so again, any questions, ask away. Otherwise, we will see you in video number 4.